consensus as well. And you can't rely on those history books. You have to go through, you have to go through archives and find out what the facts were at the time. And you could build these patterns after you start setting up these nodes, graph them out, and you could come up with a pretty accurate picture. That's what I did, plus a little thing that I do with the phase theorem that I've kind of tweaked, and that's how I came up with the March 21st date for the economy.
Tartaria.
Yes, Tartaria. Look at what happened.
Yeah, what happened? I mean, wireless power. Today I have with me Chad K, analytics on here, and actual some numerals and figures to try to figure out where we might be pushing in the future. He's also working with Ben Shields over at the Right Media, Director of Operations over there, and been involved with the documentary here. I want to make sure I have it correct. Behind the Barricades of America's Border Crisis. And this was an expose documentary there on the Right Media as well. Now, Chad and I, we had a chance to talk a little while ago and thought I'd bring him on here because as we move forward, there's a lot of things going on that seem to be shadow stats, as well as the way you're using data to try to predict or look at the future. And again, can you beat the algorithm? Can you beat the facial recognition tech? Who knows? But if you're in an undisclosed location, hanging out on a farm with a stock on, you're halfway there with the satellite connection. Anyway, Chad, thanks for joining us. I got the screen over here and the camera here, so if you see me looking right and left, I'm trying to look over the screen and back here again. And away we go. The floor is yours.
Hey, thanks for having me, David. It's a pleasure. I have watched Adapt 2030 probably since 2016. And everything you do on that channel has about 90% of it has come to fruition in regards to your forecasting of crop yields, the now food shortage.
Yeah, it's not me pointing out the data. There's so many other people out there. I mean, if you go over to What's Up With That and you get in their blog roll, and then, you know, it'll just keep leading you down the rabbit hole. If you go to John Casey, or if you're over on Dr. Roy Spencer's site, and you know, every stone you unturn then leads you to another place and another, and then you're over at Piers Corbin, and then, you know, it depends where you head to, and eventually you start to see a lot of science connected dots, and that's what we were talking about, the science connected dots that then lead you to a different analysis than what the narratives are being put out there. And again, what are these narratives for? Obviously, it's for control of the population, but you know, where do we sit on the timeline moving forward? And that's where your analysis comes in, and what you think based on previous, I guess, iterations of time moving forward, crunching some details. Where are we? Where are we going?
Well, I study Cliodynamics, and that's history, the facts of history over a long duration. And there's a really good book called The Four Turnings. And right now we're at that fourth turning where everything just converges. Not to mention, that's just culturally in society. That's not even counting the Grand Solar Minimum. And then up north, the grow zones are shrinking dramatically. And this all kind of correlates, I think, 70 AD. And whenever the Romans really had I guess you could say, the monopoly on grain.
Talked to a friend of mine today living up in the New England states, and he was saying that lynx are starting to make quite the southern push. And he was equating the animal migration of the lynx to saying, well, they reside in cooler climates, so if the lynx are moving further south, they know that the climate's staying cooler and going to continue to cool. Seems animals are about 2 years ahead of us intuitively at the bare minimum, maybe more. So if lynx are pushing further south, because the climate's going to be pushing further south cold, where does that leave us then in history here? Mechanism being put in place, but in terms of demographics moving, you know, where does that come? Because the border documentary that you're doing, that fits right in there with that. People are going to be moving a lot more.
And yeah, that's a really good point. The fact that right now they're continuing the lockdown and restricting travel dramatically. Mexico is the one who closed its border. Um, if the Lynx are moving south, I mean those are cats. They can stand some pretty rough weather. I've also noticed that a lot of animals have they started coming back into the public and just laying down wherever. Another aspect of this is due to the low crop yields and the amount of bioengineering that takes place for the crops to grow in those colder or hotter climates. It's a theory right now, but I've looked at the data, and the mourning dove, the deer, all these game animals and these wild animals that go and forage in crops, it seems that they're the ones that are getting these really weird diseases. That's our food supply. So not to mention with the weather, the climate, and now mixed together with that, the bioengineering of all the, their food chain, bringing it up to our food chain. And you were just talking about those feral hogs, how they may or may not be diseased, but I think it's just kind of I guess you could say, the canary in the coal mine, these wild animals that are ended up with these weird brain diseases or these never before seen cancers, that in the case of the mourning dove. It's really hard to explain to people who just, it's not that they don't care, it's that they haven't even been taught the basics about what meteorology, and they don't understand cycles as well as people like you and I, who pretty much all day looking at cycles to try and find the best probability of what's going to happen. And it looks like right now you could, that summers are going to be hotter, winters will be longer, and eventually what's going to happen is you're just going to have a 1 or 2 month really hot summer, leaving only one grow season for, I think it's like half of the country. And then that's going to dissipate. And then put on top of that, the animals that are going to migrate out, like the lynx, you don't have to have meat. You could forage, and there's a lot of great things. But do you know what to forage for? Do you know where to forage? Do you know what times of year to do all of this? I know you wrote a book about it. And if you don't know what to do, you're really going to freak out. You have to mentally prepare for this. They say, pray for peace, plan for war. And you've got to have that mindset if you have a family or if you want to survive. You've got to have that mindset. You don't have a choice. And if you don't, when something catastrophic happens, and I'm not talking in terms of what recently happened, but when you find out that you can't get food for a 2-year-old, for a 3-year-old, for your ailing parents, what are you going to do? You can say, I'll get it. I got a gun or something. But that's easier said than done, because other people, they're thinking the same things. Society is going to break down. We're already seeing some, I guess you could say, some signals, some determinants of that in regards to what the lockdown caused. Not to mention, I guess I like to call it the Chinese model, the gradual communist move to destabilize countries at their most vulnerable in situations like this. That's going to affect people. They don't realize that as well. All these things are part of Cliodynamics, and you have to take them because they're the facts, they're historical facts. The data, you don't do possibility. It's the facts are there. You have to take out the conjecture. The history books that you use there are all, I guess you could say, consensus as well. consensus as well. And you can't rely on those history books. You have to go through archives and find out what the facts were at the time. And you could build these patterns after you start setting up these nodes, graph them out, and you could come up with a pretty accurate picture. That's what I did, plus a little thing that I do with the Bayes theorem that I kind of tweaked, and that's how I came up with the March 21st date for the economy.
And some issues like this, I want to go deeper into thought, but I cannot on certain social media platforms. Join me on patreon.com/adapt2030, where I go in depth into the topics that keep you and your family climate prepared. Weekly videos and posts around relevant discussions, weaving together today's headlines so you get a much wider view. These fingerprints of the Grand Solar Minimum, starting these ideas and thoughts so you can make great decisions and adapt and thrive during these changes, so you're really prepared with useful information and insights, practical advice. The end of the era seems to make no sense unless you understand this is a cycle. And the platform is a big help getting the research done. Releasing exclusives first on Patreon. 100% supported by you, so we can all share ideas moving through these changes. If you feel this would be helpful for understanding where our world's heading, join the Adapt Pack at patreon.com/adapt2030.
Tartaria.
Yes, Tartaria. Look at what happened.
Yeah, what happened? I mean, wireless power. I was over in the Czech Republic, and those antennas are all over. And I stayed at Airbnb, and we were at this artist's Airbnb, like flat up there, and he had a book collection in the 1950s, 1940s. And they had the original mansions all across the Czech Republic with the original wireless antennas on them before they were tore down after World War II, and even now. So when you go into Vienna, because my girlfriend and myself, we traveled over to Vienna, not an antenna in sight. As soon as you cross that border from Czech Republic, scrubbed clean, sterilized. History. Across the border, you go right back over to Czech Republic and get some of the more hinterlands there out in the wine growing country, whatever. They still have the mansions. And even downtown in Prague, they still have some areas on some buildings that have, and especially when you get further out, like Český Krumlov up into the building, you can actually see where the mud floods and the global liquefaction events, actually covered some parts of the castle where they had to break through on the walls and buried windows and all kind of crazy. So I think they're connected. Planetary alignments caused that global liquefaction event. And then there was something prior that had a better tech in terms of wireless technology that had some way to produce power that we are either unaware of or it's hidden from us. But, when they're talking about wireless power, and Tesla was saying he just was getting the ideas from prior. So where does that leave you? I mean, Tesla, one of the best of the day, still is the best. More than 100 years ago, saying the information he was getting was from 100 or 200 years prior to himself. That would take us back into the late, 1700s. Something was there, something's been hidden. Because the artifact images that I saw where they had power devices, but there was no leads into them, and they were definitely running on electricity, but these were, 17th century heat, 17th century boilers, 17th century other type of things that light. They're like, what do you mean? They didn't even light back then. They did. It must have meant something glowed and reflected, but how did you power it? So there's a whole scrubbed history there, in my personal opinion. Whoever wins writes the history, right? So how many times, how many wars have been lost and fought, and then the person who won the war, the country that won, the ideology that won, just scrubbed everything else away, threw it away, burned it, whatever, probably wraps it up and sent it back to the Vatican or whatever. But then, then they rewrote it in this way. So you're right, this consensus of history that's been scrubbed. So it's been a linear progression versus a cyclical progression.
That's correct. So the way I found out about Tartaria, because I didn't believe it, is I went digging.
You're insane. The more I look, the more it is in front of you.
I had to find it in a CIA document. There's a couple of CIA documents that mention old historical maps, public education textbooks, and there's even some memos regarding Tartaria all the way up through 1948. And if you get on CIA.gov and just start digging through it's a treasure trove of information. And you have to take into consideration the grammar of the day, just like you do with the Constitution. And you have to put all that stuff together, and you could paint a really nice picture of what they were doing without even needing classified documents. Information always tells you something. Anyone that has a wild claim and people just go, oh, I'm not going to listen to that. That's nonsense. You have to look beyond the words that they're saying and look further into why they're saying it. So the whitewashing of history, and you could kind of see it now in regards to them wanting, I guess you could say culturally wanting to change the definition of words. Bolshevik Revolution left a lot of land in Russia just desolate, land that could have been farmed, and how many people starved?
The farmers starved because they took all their tools that they could have planted. So they went in and stole all their seeds, stole all their tools, took every possible possession away, and just said, all right, well, you're on arable land. Good luck with it.
Shortly after I started paying attention to the Grand Solar Minimum, and I was at a feed store in Central Texas, and some guys were talking about the almanac and what it was predicting. And I was like, I just heard about this thing, these climate cycles, and this is how they work, and you can look forward to something like this. And well, they're like, oh, well, the almanac says this, and lo and behold, those farmers, because I knew who they lost a lot of crop because they planted too early. Where am I with this? Do you remember that movie, The Day After Tomorrow?
Absolutely. One of my go-to predictive programming thing, as well as Snowpiercer. Day After Tomorrow, yeah. Well, those two, put those together, that's a powerful combo of predictive programming.
Correct. And when people hear about predictive programming and they watch these movies, they're like, oh, that could never happen. Well, it's dramatized. And as agriculture goes offline, especially in the Midwest and in the North, I guess you could say 30 degrees, probably about 25 to 30 degrees above where I'm at. And Central Texas and North Texas are going to look something like Nebraska and South Dakota. And if you move over to New Mexico, even into Arizona, they're getting some, their deserts are blooming in places. Humidity is up more often than it used to be. I used to live in Peoria. So yeah, that wall is going to serve two purposes for sure. And I know it seems unlikely, but all the data suggests that migration for work and food will take place, because they're not preparing people for the food shortages that are about to happen. They didn't even prepare us for, I guess you could say, the hiccup that's happening right now that'll prolong probably another 4 or 5 months, if not 8 months. And they didn't say anything, back 2 or 3 months ago. They waited until places like Australia and the UN started saying, hey, we're going to be facing a global food shortage. And that's when they started talking about it. And now they tried to, kind of do a little misdirection, and they really focused on the locusts in Africa, but they wouldn't ever talk about, well, there's no one out there to do the fields. We have milk being dumped out, and we have entire fields being cultivated back into the soil, and farmers markets being closed down by, I guess you could say, tyrants. And all these things are going to culminate. People might not be seeing it personally right now, And that's kind of that optimism bias that a lot of us have. It's going to be like a surprise almost, and it's going to catch a lot of people off guard, and they're not going to be ready, and they're going to freak out. And when they freak out, they're going to run. Where are they going to run to? Where the food is.
And how prepared are you for the transition into the Grand Solar Minimum? Are you prepared for emergencies? Our friends at My Patriot Supply do have emergency survival food, the 2-week grab-and-go food crate or the 4-week food supply. They also have water filtration and items that you can use yourself to get ready to pack, such as Mylar bags, oxygen packs, things you can use for your own long-term food storage, and a host of different survival items that you might not have thought about in your preparations. Use the Adapt 2030 link in the description box below. And while you're there, take a look at the selection of heirloom seeds, because you are going to have to grow some of your own food moving forward into the Eddy Grand Solar Minimum. Take back your peace of mind by knowing that you're prepared when others might not be.
How many millions of people can go to these individual countries before the countries start to say enough? Own property or not, we're renationalizing everything, changing the rules. Like Central America, how many times have we seen the rule change back and forth over the last 50 years? Oh, it's pro-West friendly. Oh, it's not. It's Sandinistas. Oh, it's not. It's what is it here, there, and everywhere that things are taken back and forth. They got Nicaragua. They had El Salvador, Panama, everything in between. Like if you say you went there in the 1980s and bought land, you would definitely not own your land now. There's been so many restrictions. No way. So when people go down there and they're kind of safe now, buy land, everything, but what happens when the rules change?
Oh, the rules will change. It'll be kind of like when Obama was president and I was in the military, and the rules of engagement changed, weekly. Something like that. When you have people who don't understand what they're doing, or they're acting out of fear, or they're protecting what's theirs, so that'd be their land. We would be visitors in that land. Yeah, they're going to be kicking people out. You could take just that small little sample size and look at something like that, and it wasn't even the type of circumstance that we're going to be facing. When it comes to food, you need to think wild wolf with a dead deer, and then you versus that wolf. If you're in someone else's country and there's a food shortage, you've got no type of backup or foundation to mount any type of defense. You're going to get kicked out, killed, or imprisoned, or forced labor.
China, no, this is no joke. China is laying claim to Taiwan in the Neolithic era, 18,000 years ago, when the water levels were lower. And
when you could walk to the islands?
Yeah. Oh, there's some temples there's actually 2 sets of temples. Maybe this is no joke. This is a real fact. Between Taiwan and the Straits used to be empty when the sea levels were lower, about 200 feet deep there. Sea levels used to be 400 feet lower. So at that time, there's 2 temple complexes in the strait between Taiwan and Xiamen there. And fishermen, they routinely leave that area alone because they're always losing nets out there. And Grant Hancock and those guys went and dove it. Yeah, they did a bunch of underwater sounding, and it definitely, it was a circular basin, and it was quite long. And there's 2 of those, and everywhere we look across. But China's saying because those were there when the last ice age was there, that proved that it's not an island, that it was connected by land. So 18,000 years ago, it was China.
No, you know what? That makes perfect sense. It also kind of explains a lot of what they're, trying to pull with the South China Sea by building, those barrier islands and militarizing those. I guess you could see what's happening as the food shortages take place. Australia is kind of, they use the virus as a catalyst or an excuse, but they're starting to look at China pretty critically, thinking about revoking a lot of the contracts they have in regards to the land that they've sold, the corporations that they've invested in. That's also going on in Germany. They're talking about it here in the United States with the telecom companies.
I'm going to take you back to World War II. Prior to World War II, Australian guy, he saw the exact same thing. This is the 1930s. And he saw that there was going to be a great war. And he saw the signs just like we're seeing here. And he thought to himself, all right, where's the most remote place that nobody's ever heard of, that this war, I don't care how big it gets, it will never, ever, ever touch this place? He had some money, and he decided to set up on this island called Guadalcanal. True story. True story. And this is about the thing where, you think you might find the safest spot because you see all these signs in front of you. But in reality, where's the dangerous spot? Where's the safety spot? Because I encourage everybody to read that story. I forget the guy's name, but you can look it up. Guy from Australia, a businessman who wanted to escape World War II, ended up on Guadalcanal, and you know what happened there. So he thought he was in the safest place, but it turned out not to be at all. It turned out to be the most tumultuous place. So even with our best analysis of conditions, areas, stability, food growing, economy, friendliness of people, similar religious beliefs, similar societal norms, etc. When you go to places, you might think you were in the safest place, but then you're right in the middle of the rocket's red glare there.
Depending on what happens, if you're invaded, you need to stay moving, and you need to stay, and you can just stay moving in a secluded area, but you have to stay moving. You can't get complacent with, I guess you could call it a routine. You don't really want a routine. You don't want anything that, I guess you could say, a militia or a military group or a recon group could come up and say, okay, well, somebody's here, because you could spot a routine very easily. You make trails, you leave trash, carcasses of animals. You could tell when the land has been disturbed, even just by one person who has a routine in the middle of the woods. So what's the safest place? I mean, if there's a war, there is no safe place. Safest place is the ground under your feet, because you can't really control that. But if you don't know game theory, if you don't know military strategy, if you don't understand just the basics of conventional warfare or even guerrilla warfare, you're better off just moving, not in groups, staying hidden as well as you can. And if you're trying to plan to go somewhere, I would say if I had to choose the most safe place, it'd be somewhere underground. And I'm not saying luxury underground, because if you go luxury, then I could guarantee you that you're going to have some type of ventilation system that'll be spotted, or a lot of people don't realize that the food that you eat, soldiers from different countries and even soldiers from the United States don't eat that food. They can smell you from 200 yards. Things like that you have to think about. And in regards to preparing for a world war, you can't get away. It's a world war. The military is going to be looking for those secluded places in order for jump-off bases. I mean, it's possible, but it's unlikely that you're going to find it, being a first world traveler. Now, if you go and speak to somebody like the tribes down in South America, you might be able to find something.
Very difficult to escape anywhere, and then you probably wouldn't want to live that way of life, because it would be too rudimentary. If you just get dropped in there, it would be too much of a culture shock too fast, and you would just freak out yourself. You wouldn't know what to do. It'd be such a like a fast shift on the diet, and not knowing the language, and the insects, and the sickness, and the danger.
Oh yeah.
On slopes and cuts and things that don't heal, and a million bug bites, and you're itchy, and it's like, you're backpacking and going out with the hill tribes to hang for 2 weeks. Imagine what, and no war, and actually, you're in pretty good condition comparatively. And can you imagine what it'd be like? All right, this is it for how many years now? I mean,